Hi, in this video we'll take our scene that has materials, lights and a camera setup. We'll render it and then do some fun post work on it with Photoshop. First, we need to render our scene from last time in Stager. Rendering's pretty easy. You just go to the render tab, pick your settings and start it. I've got a dedicated video covering the basics, so I won't dive too deep into this. One key thing here is that I used high quality settings. Usually medium is okay, but with so much subsurface scattering, I need high quality to get rid of the noise and the scattering. I made sure to render to PSD file format, as you can have much more fun with that. Let's go ahead and open that in Photoshop. Keep in mind, for this video, I'm assuming you already have good base knowledge of Photoshop, as I won't explain each individual tool and button. Rather, I just want to show a bunch of neat tricks to do in 2D, so let's get to it. First off, I find the shadows on the ground to be a bit dull and lacking in punch. They're rendered together with my toaster, but I can use the additional layers together with object selection to get a selection of my toaster without the shadows. I'll use that selection to separate them into two layers with masks. The bottom layer of my main render is now for my shadows only, so I'll add another mask and use a big, soft paintbrush to paint some of those harsher, bright artifacts out. Having a low flow on the brush helps to be more precise. So these usually come from using physical area lights, but they're pretty easy to remove in Photoshop. Next, every render can use some adjustments to contrast and values. I like to add adjustment layers because they're non-destructive and easier to access. In this case, I'll do a curves adjustment layer. And I also like to set these adjustment layers to clip so that they only affect my render layer, the layer below. And you can do that by alt-clicking between two layers and it makes it a clipping layer. I'm going to lock the mid-range by clicking in the middle and then go a bit more cinematic by crushing low values and boosting high values a bit. This render is actually pretty good in terms of values, so I can tone it down and tweak the effect by changing the opacity of the adjustment layer. And sometimes, in the last video you saw me do it as well, it's nice to add an additional brightness contrast adjustment layer to help bring up the global tone again. So I'm just adding that and setting it to clip as well. When my overall levels are good, I'll move to another trick, adding a soft bloom effect. For this, I need to duplicate the main render and push the contrast to the extreme. This looks terrible at first, but I mainly want to blow out and isolate the areas that need to get a bit of a glowing bloom effect. Usually these are the main reflection highlights. Once the values are right, I run a Gaussian blur filter to do the actual glow. You don't want to go too extreme with the blur radius. Then all that's left is to find a nice blending mode, like linear dodge or lighter color. They work well in this case. And then finally, I'll reduce the opacity, as being subtle is key with bloom. It looks very cheesy quickly otherwise. So looking up close, that adds a nice extra touch of softness. It plays pretty well with the scattering plastics. And then I want to use some more adjustment layers to tweak that bottom shadow layer. It could do with being a bit darker. So I'll bring that down, and then I'll add a hue saturation adjustment layer to add some color into the shadows, making sure to turn on colorize and makes it look less bland. Now, this background, it's still a bit boring, so I'm going to put some bold colors and shapes in there. I'm just using Photoshop's vector shape tools to draw some stuff in there. I'm picking colors that complement and work well with the render. I don't want to overpower the 3D render, so I stay a bit more muted with my colors. And then at the end, that yellow triangle, it could do with some deformation at the bottom. It adds some depth and it makes it look like a curving background, so I'm adjusting that too. And then the last thing I want to do is adjust the color cast on my shadows to work better with the background. So nice warm tinted shadow, a little red tint, it works great on yellow. And that's about it for my post work on this render. There really are endless possibilities here at the intersection between 2D and 3D, so try it out yourself and have some fun with it.